I should have dressed differently. I'm sorry. I take my sister-in-law's dog for a walk every day because she's...
Well, just a second. Have you any masking tape? Well, that's not patient, and I'm monitoring where I'm covered.
Can you move to the right just a little bit?
Sure. See, it was over there, so I have to go on this side to cook evenly. Right. We rolling? 5 minutes pre-roll? Great. Sit back. I don't always ask. These guys always think of it. Hello, by the way, from Eric House, and last night, and it was at Leslie O's place. I talked to Leslie O and Gilbert. Gilbert left, and Eric House came over for dinner. And when they found out I was interviewing you and Len today, they both asked me to do a special.
Eric is one of the most wonderful performers. He's been in plays of mine, and I loved him. And he seems to have just sort of resigned from the world.
Yes.
Why?
It's a phase I think he's in right now. Leslie talked about it just before he arrived, and I think he thinks all is for naught, that the world is so changed, the audiences have changed, that he was never good, and all those things. And from what I've been hearing, is he's one of the naturals. Actually, we're rolling now, so could you just tell me a little bit of the natural talent of Eric House?
I can't believe that he's not in the business still. I've seen him at Stratford. I've been with him at the Charlottetown Festival. He's acted in a play of mine. He played a drunken colonel in a play by me, but it was based on Earl Burney's Turvey, which is about the Canadian Army in World War II. And Turvey is up for court-martial, and he's defended by this lush of a colonel. And Eric played him with such subtlety, such great humor. He's, to me, one of the joys, and he was a particular favorite of Tyrone Guthrie. We, from the very first production, Richard III with Alec Guinness, Eric and Bill Needles were the two murderers who were going to kill the Duke of Clarence, played by Lloyd Bachner. And they started out with the kind of mummer set, that kind of which people do when they get in English plays. And Guthrie stopped them both cold and said, no, this is the Stratford, Ontario Festival. We will be doing Canadian voices. I don't think that tradition has persisted, but Guthrie insisted that we speak Shakespeare the way Canadians speak it. He said that actually Canadian speech was far closer to Elizabethan speech than good Oxford English spoken by John Kilgood. He gave us an example. He said, now let the blast of war blow in our face, which is kind of West Country and Irish, much closer to our speech. So Eric started doing a kind of approximation to Charlie Farquharson. Now, I had only begun the character the year before in 52. This was 53, but he did a very good impersonation. So I was represented in more ways than one in the first Stratford Festival. Then the second year, Eric was there, but it was the third year when we were doing The Merchant of Venice that I remember particularly. Guthrie delighted in him. And he was playing the Duke of something, was it the one who picking the silver casket? And he played it like the Queen's Christmas message. My husband and I, and Guthrie just beamed. He really adored Eric, and I do too.
That was the year the Frenchman came down, wasn't it?
No, that was the following year, the fourth year. I was not there the fourth year. I was supposed to be there. Michael Langham took me out to dinner the last night of the third season rather, and I played Octavius Caesar for him. And he said, hope you're coming back next year. I said, I'd love to. I'd like to make my life here. And he said, what do you want to play? We're doing Henry V. I said, I want to play the chorus. I want to play him like an ordinary guy in ordinary clothing, denim shirt and overalls or something, and go through the play with the as a contemporary voice. He thought it was a marvelous idea. So next spring, when they were handing out the parts, I was cast as Fenton in Merry Wives of Windsor, a play I never particularly cared for. And Fenton is one of those nice young, nerdy young men. And I said, well, that's okay. What am I playing in Henry V? And it was Bishop Scroop. So I sent a 2-word telegram to Michael Langham, "Scroop you," and departed for New York City, and ended up in the American Shakespeare Festival. We're Stratford on the Housatonic. We used to call it Disneyland on the Housatonic. And Michael came down to visit me during that first year and said, "I want you to write a play for me," because I was not speaking to the man. And he had me adapt a German 1-act play called The Broken Jug, and I did a 3-act version for the Stratford Company. They did a tour in London, Ontario, Montreal, where I got my best notices, New York, where I got pretty good. I got better notices than Shakespeare did, and 2 Gentlemen of Verona from Brooks Atkinson anyway. And we've been friends ever since, but I never acted for him ever since.
It's like patching up a jug, patching up a relationship too. I'm going to take this from the top here a little bit. I don't want to stick to it too much.
Okay.
Dora Mavor, there's this quote from you that she saw you as a piece of male flesh that could possibly be used in a troupe show. That's cute. The Village Players. Can you tell me about your involvement with Village Players, Dora Mavor?
Well, I was released from the Air Force. I was put on the Air Force Reserve in January of 1945. I was a pilot officer bombardier. And which kind of shocked us all because the flight next to us went over to England. And they had a marvelous time all the summer of 1945 yachting in Bournemouth. And I never got there. I never got overseas. I did daylight sweeps over London, Paris, and Brantford in Ontario instead. So I was at loose ends, and a friend of mine, Ralph Hicklin, who I'd had a year of college before I joined the Air Force, and he was kind of a guy who opened up the world to me, showed me Shakespeare and ballet and S.J. Perelman and various writers that I would come to love. And he brought me to a showing of the Village Players, kind of just a little demonstration of a 1-act play called Fumed Oak by Noel Coward. And I loved it, and he introduced me to Dora, and Dora's eyes lit up because at that stage of the war, in January 1945, most of the men had not come back, and males were very hard to come by. She looked at me as a piece of meat, not in any sexual way, just she wanted somebody to play in her plays. She was about to launch a hospital tour of Charlie's Aunt. She wanted to make the boys who were in the beds laugh. And she told me, she cast me right there. Now, I'd been an actor when I was a kid at 11. I was, in fact, a star on radio. I had my own series. And I'd done a little bit of work in high school and played bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream for one scene. Didn't understand a word of what I was saying. Tripped on the 2x4 across the door on my way in, and the audience laughed and I was furious. Tripped on the same 2x4 on the way out, and the audience laughed again, and I realized there's something to this. It was kind of nice to be laughed at. But I hadn't really done any heavy drama, and I tried out for a comedy lead in The Devil's Disciple by Bernard Shaw in my first year of college, and I was handed a walk-on. I played a character with no lines. There's a trial scene in this play. Dick Dudgeon, the American hero, is on trial for his life as a traitor to the British forces. And I was a Hessian officer. I'll get around to Dora in a minute. It was directed by Earl Grey. And I was a Hessian officer. They gave me a white wig, great big boots, white tights, white breeches, and a beautiful red coat. And I wasn't given any direction. So the first night, and I wasn't there at the dress rehearsal, I was there opening night. So opening night, I just sat there like a bump on a log. And the director said, "Don't you realize, my dear chap, that this man is on trial for his life? Can't you possibly react?" I said, "But I'm playing a German." He says, "I know, that's the moving part of it. You should understand what's going on, so you must ask." Well, I'd taken high school German. So the second night, the play was on for 3 nights. The second night, I got on, and they gave me a different wig. The first night was kind of a handsome wig. The second night, the wig I got was somebody else's. I guess they'd rejected it. It made me look a bit like Harpo Marx. And I did my own makeup, which was rather overstated. I got out there, and every time a question was asked, I went, "Was haben Sie gesagt?" Ich weiß nicht, was soll das bedeuten? I was the center of every eye, not really because of the interruptions in German, but because my tights, the breeches, started to split from the knee, and they were going slowly toward the crotch. So there was a kind of a suspense drama going on besides George Bernard Shaw's comedy. The third night I was asked not to appear. So I didn't have a very distinguished career as an actor. So Dora got the cast together of Charlie's aunt. She actually had two casts because the actors were the radio actors of Toronto. Barbara Kelly, wife of Bernard Braden, was Charlie's aunt, and she was replaced when she couldn't do it by Jane Mallett, who was Canada's B. Lilly, except B. Lilly is a Canadian, but she was like that good. And other distinguished radio actors, and I was there with them, and I felt so out of place. I felt so untalented. And when the read-through ended, I told Dora I wanted to quit. And she said, no. You stay after, and we'll have some tea and some cookies. And she taught me how to move across the stage without knocking the furniture over. And she continued to do this. She was kind of a mentor to me, very patient. I didn't play a comic role. I was called Jack Chesney, who was the friend of Charlie, who was the aunt, Charlie's aunt. No, Charlie was played by Vern Chapman, and he was very funny. He was very funny just simply because he never moved his arms. He walked without moving. If you ever try that sometime, it's a very funny effect. Charlie's aunt was played by Jack Metters, a brilliant young actor who had been the player queen in Hamlet at the Royal Alec. And so I sort of got through it. And it was a beginning for me. And then we did other little projects, and eventually I got accepted into CBC Radio Group.
What's this about working with Dora after rehearsals?
Yeah, she became a kind of adopted son. Her own sons were away at war. I think she felt that very keenly. And
you just went through all that, actually. You just went through that. That was the concept of going pro. Were you amateur at the Village Players?
Sure. But everybody, the difference was nobody considered the difference because we were making money in radio and then we were doing the amateur thing in our own time. And if you couldn't make a rehearsal, it didn't matter that much. And the idea of going pro and giving up that radio money in case you had a conflict was something that most of us were not keen on. We liked the amateur status. Because Dora proposed a company that would get $7.50 per performance, what she called an honorarium. It's a fancy word for you ain't getting much money. And she had decided that I would play the lead in the first play, which was The Playboy of the Western World. And they had to get permission from New York to do this because at the same time a production was going on with Burgess Meredith playing my role. Or rather, I was playing his role. So, but because I was offered the lead, and I have a gift for doing accents. It hides a lot of sins. And I still remember lines from that play. The greatest love scenes to me are in that play, better than Shakespeare's. He says, Christy Mann, the Playboy of the Western World, which is an ironic title because he's a very shy country bumpkin and everybody thinks he's this marvelous man. Just because he's killed his father, he's a celebrity. Sounds like today, doesn't it? So I remember saying to the girl, Peggy and Mike, played by Jean Crochet, and we'll be astray and heiress and making mighty kisses with our wetted mouths till I'd feel a kind of pity for the Lord God is sitting lonesome in his golden chair. And the play was a great success. We only did it 2 nights. That's how we started. Eventually we did for 2 weekends, and then we did it for three times a week, every week for about a month. And when Spring Thaw came along, suddenly we were doing a show every night for a month.
This growing ability to believe in yourself as an actor, I had the little anecdote about a fellow who was like armless and continued in his profession, and that inspired you somehow.
Herb Gott.
Yeah, tell me all about that.
He'd had an accident when he was about 14 with a train, and his both arms were sheared off. And he was a radio actor. But he did his first bit of directing with me in the village barn. It was a summer production. Behind Dora's house was a little barn, and we used it as a showcase for plays. And we did a play by William Saroyan called Hello Out There. It's a very stark play. It's about a young man who's held in jail in Texas on a rape charge, of which he's totally innocent. And a young girl who is working in the jail as kind of a, I don't know, cleans up, maid, anything, eventually lets him go. And Herb directed it, and he would say things like, my hands, when I had hands, used to sweat, and I want you to feel that. And but this kind of, when I had hands, I mean, I later used him as an actor in the only play I've ever directed was John Coulter's Riel, about the Louis Riel, and Herb played the defense attorney, and we put the robes on him, and with the robes, and he was very handsome. Nobody knew that he had no arms, so who didn't know Herb. So he did it very well.
It was back to about 52, 53 or so. Where did you do that? Riel?
No, Riel was 49. That was the year we did all Canadian plays. And we did a play by Andrew Allen, we did a play by Harry J. Boyle, we did a play by Lister Sinclair, we were supposed to do a play called Two Solitudes, the great Hugh MacLennan novel about Quebec, and it never came through. It was to be adapted by another Hugh called Hugh Kemp, and he was busy working in an advertising agency. He didn't have time to do it, so that's when we all got together and decided we would do our party pieces in a slapdash revue, which we threw together, which actually had a plot. We used a radio script by Tommy Tweed, and I forget what it's called, but it was about trying to form a union in a department store, ostensibly Eaton's, which I don't think has a union even yet. But and then we to the plot we added all kinds of our party pieces that we did, and that was the beginning of Spring Thaw. The title was given to us by Andrew Allen. It was his idea, and I don't think he was ever paid for the title. But he was a marvelous sense of, we opened on March the 21st, the first day of spring. People were fed up with winter. They wanted to laugh. And that became the most successful show we ever did.
Who would know more about being grateful for spring than a Westerner like Andrew Allen? Tell me a little more about that than Spring Thaw. It was repeated in further years, did you not? Would you like to dab just
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I'm going to confess and say, I did it.
You're going to do the lights. The Riel got a mention in this book, your direction of that.
Yeah, Spring Thaw became a staple. The second performance, we did twice as many performances. And by the third performance, it was a 5-week run, which went on. I finally had to leave. I said, look, I've got to go to England. I had the tickets, and so I left in the middle of the run. And my place was taken by 3 other guys. Don't ask me why. But I stayed away for 2 years. The Spring Thaw 51, I was not present for, but I sent material from England for my friend Lou Jacobi, who was performing in Spring Thaw for the first time. I came back for 52, and that's where Charlie Farquharson was born. And Spring Thaw 52 was with Norman Jewison, who was a very good comic actor. He did a sketch about a hockey player from Homicide Collegiate. That's Humberside is a school in Toronto, and that's the way he pronounced it, Homicide. And that's the way they played hockey.
Okay, New Play Society. Can we jump into that for a little bit? Speaking of Dora, some of the key players, for example, in the New Play Society. Tell me about them, Green, Graney, Mallet, etc. What it was like working together, the body politic of that.
Well, they were basically from the radio colony in Toronto, with a few people brought in from an amateur groups. And the amateurs were just as good as the professionals to me. I didn't see any difference. But the New Play Society didn't really become the New Play Society until 1949, the third year of its existence. no, the 4th year of his existence, because we did all new plays. We started out doing the classics. We did Shaw and Congreve and O'Casey and the occasional Shakespeare. And people would volunteer to give up some of their radio to do a performance. When Andrew Allen directed Eugene O'Neill's Our Wilderness, everybody volunteered because they wanted to work for Andrew. So there was no hesitation there. But a lot of the radio actors were preparing for the advent of television, which came in '52. They said, I better learn how to act when people can see what I'm doing. Because radio acting tends you get into all kinds of bad habits, as I know. But I did the stage acting all through college, and all through all through those radio years. I mean, I was always a stage actor.
Sorry to jump back a little. Did you know anything about My Fair Lady?
Knew about it, saw it, loved it, and there was the McGill Red and White Society, and a boy called Don, he used to be in charge of the Art Centre in Ottawa, McSween, did a kind of Charlie Farquharson. I was so thrilled. I had just come back from Hollywood that year to see the show at the Royal Albert. But that was a wonderful show, absolutely wonderful.
How do you use the Charlie Farquharson? Obviously, I can't go see Spring Thaw anymore. It's not down at the theatre. I mean, it's long since folded.
He's still very active. He's probably the most active thing I do, as a matter of fact. I've been asked to go back and do plays, and I go to Stratford, and I thought, why should I stand on a stage with a lot of other actors when I can stand there all by myself, and not be interrupted by anybody, not have to wear those tights that itch in the summertime? So I wear this heavy sweater instead, which I borrowed from Norman Campbell when we did a television show together in '52. Because I did Charlie originally in that revue, Spring Thaw, with my father's navy blue suit with the shiny pants. I never thought of clothing Charlie for the farm, even though I had worked on a farm for a farmer who wore a peak cap and a sweater and glasses. And that's the way I dressed him. I spent about 7 months on a farm in Ontario just before I went to college. And when I went to college, I was there about 3 weeks, and the call came to go out west to bring in the harvest, because a lot of the hired men had joined the army. This was 1942. I went out west, and the first farmer I worked for wore a peak cap and a sweater and had glasses. And I thought, my God, are they franchising them? So I thought there was something universal, at least Canadianly universal about the character. But I didn't have the nerve to do him for 10 years. I did the accent. I was fascinated by the accent, which was kind of 5th generation Northern Irish and Lowland Scot, which is what my family is. And I would do them on farm broadcast shows. I did the accent in a play on stage called The Inheritance by Harry Boyle, about an Ontario farm family run by the Scottish martinet of a father. And I played the younger son who was the rebel. And I did it with a kind of, my girl, Dad, she's pretty hard to do. Nobody noticed. Next year, in '52, when I did it in Spring Thaw, I did this routine about a farmer at the Canadian National Exhibition. He wasn't called Charlie Farquharson. He was looking for a man named Charlie Farquharson, who was the assistant convener for the horseshoe pigeon. And he says, do you mind Charlie Farquharson? And so the person he's talking to says, no. He says, well, isn't that a coincidence? And but people laughed, not at what I said, but at the way I said it. I think it was the first time that a Canadian rural accent had ever been used on the stage, or a Canadian accent of any kind. I mean, Wayne and Schuster were doing their show, and it was kind of like a wonderful Jack Benny show, and the only other team were Woodhouse and Hawkins, who did English music hall. So Charlie was the first Canadian character, I think.
Was there no risk? No risk involved with him?
No. It was the shock of recognition. People loved it. They all knew somebody who talked that way. It was the most successful thing I've ever done, except possibly Anne of Green Gables, the musical, which is still running after 30 years.
Been to Japan with that?
Mm-hmm.
When did that catch on in Japan, by the way, first?
When did Japan catch on?
When did Japan catch on to Anne?
Well, Japan actually oddly enough caught on to Anne during the war, when we were at war with them. They had copies of the novel, which were sent over just before the hostilities started at Pearl Harbor. And the kids studied it in school. And I don't know if it's because Japan is an island and PEI was an island, or the kid had red hair, which no Japanese has, or the fact that Anne is a kind of feminist figure. She doesn't take any crap from any boy. She hits him over the head with a slate. And I think the Japanese girls appreciated that, living in the society in which they had to endure.
Can you give me a couple of highlights from your various productions? The various productions of it.
Of Anne of Green Gables? Well, it started out as a television show.
Okay. We've got to go
back
back
in 1954. I was in Toronto doing a review. I was supposed to go to London and be in a play of Jean Kerr's called King of Hearts with Cloris Leachman and Donald Cook, who was the original. They were the two original Broadway stars, and I was going to be the juvenile. Wonderful part. And as a matter of fact, Walter Kerr called me up the day I was appearing in The Merchant of Venice. The New York critic calls me up just before I'm about to appear in front of him and said, "This is Walter Kerr." I said, yeah, horse shit. You know? And he said, "No, I'm sorry, it really is." And Jean was wondering if you'd like to be in her play in London, because I'd seen it in New York and loved it. So anyway, I waited around all that season for the play to start. Donald Cook eventually died, poor love, and so we never did it. So I was hanging about, and I did this review called Fine Frenzy, which was a kind of fall freeze version of Spring Thaw. It was Charlie Farquharson swimming across Lake Ontario in his underwear, covered in golden corn syrup. And Norman Campbell came backstage. We had done some sketches in television, and I'd borrowed his sweater, and I'd borrowed Norman Jewison's father's hat. I never used my own equipment for Charlie. But Norman said, "I have been given 90 minutes of TV time, and I don't know what to do with it." And I said, "Well, I'll do a musical. You've done musicals before. You've done." He says, "But 60 minutes." I said, "Well, 90 minutes is the ideal time for you to have time to do a musical." He says, "Well, I don't know what to do." I said, "Well, I've been reading a book to my kids." They were about 4 and 5 at the time, or 5 and a half. And I said, "They're loving it, and it's called Anne of Green Gables." And I think that it would make a musical because you can't do all the kind of imaginative stuff she does. But if you put it in the lyrics of a song, it wouldn't seem kind of fey and out of date. So we did. We wrote together. And it was a black and white 90-minute show. And we had John Draney as Matthew. It was fabulous. We had Margot Christie as Marilla. She looked rather like something out of Ibsen, which is kind of good for the show. And we had a girl called Toby Tarnow. The first Anne of Green Gables was Jewish, and she was terrific. Poor love, she was sick as a dog the day we did the dress rehearsal, the day we did the show. So all through the dress rehearsal, she never spoke. She just indicated her lines, and then did the show, and she's wonderful. It's amazing. Then we forgot about the show. It was done actually as a repeat with somebody else, Kathy Willard, 2 years later, and I was in New York by this time, because actually we wrote a lot of the lyrics when I was working in New York. Norman was in Toronto, and the CBC at that time had an office in the UN building in New York. So Vincent Ravel, who was the CBC in charge, allowed me to send my lyrics through the CBC. But I didn't know it, and neither did he. But the FBI, because of Senator Joseph McCarthy, was investigating the UN, suspecting them of being communist taint. And all these lyrics about a little girl with red hair and red soil, I would say to Norman, "Did you get the lyrics?" He said, "No." 2 weeks later, they had arrived. They had to be vetted through the FBI for all this red influence. But anyway, the show was sort of in limbo. When Wayne and Schuster decided in 1964 to do a revue in Charlottetown to open the Charlottetown Festival. The Charlottetown Festival was made possible by Wayne and Schuster. They don't get enough credit for that. And they did a variety show for the Queen, and they included the title song from our musical, Anne of Green Gables, sung by Diane Stapley. And I wasn't there, but I understand it was very nice. And the Queen after said, "That's a very pretty tune. Where's the rest of the show?" So Mavor Moore phoned me. I was in California by this time doing television. He said, I don't know if you know that, but that's a royal command. Want me to go on from where I was?
As soon as I bars are down, I'll prompt you.
Okay.
Thank you. I understand that getting the rights was a nasty job for Anne of Green Gables after you had the royal command.
Well, I don't know if it was a nasty job. It was a difficult job because it had started with a company called L.C. Page, and then Farrar, Straus and Giroux had it. It took Mavor from November till April to get the rights, and I refused to work at it until I had the rights. I was doing television shows in Ottawa. What made me say that? Hollywood! I'm the first person to ever confuse Ottawa with Hollywood. But, and the show was due to open the last week of June. And I started to write it. I was living in Laurel Canyon at a kind of a Japanese ski lodge of a house, and I sat out in the outdoors with my typewriter and typed furiously for a month. And by the time I was supposed to write the last few songs, I had to go and do the show with David, what's it called? The one where, The Fugitive, David Jansen. See, you get very old, you forget of these things. And I was out in the Mojave Desert with scorpions and everything, and we had to do the show. It was, and so Mavor Moore wrote 3 songs for the show, and they were wonderful. They're some of the best songs in the show. So he saved my tuchus. And when it finally came opening night, I was back in Hollywood, but I was too late to get there. And I phoned Norman. And this is about 3 o'clock in the morning for Norman. It's about midnight for me. And he said, I think we have a hit. We have a hit. I said, I went down to the station and saw Nathan Cohen's copy. And it's a rave. And I said, did he enjoy the show? He says, I don't know. He said he was deep sea fishing all day long. He came back boiled like a lobster. He said, I sat behind him. The back of his neck was glowing with red. He fell asleep soon after the overture. He got up and had a drink at halftime. He came back and fell asleep again. And I said, well, why did he give it a rave? I said, because he's from the Maritimes, said Norman. Because when we did the show in Toronto 2 years later, he panned it.
So you were working with Barry Morse in California at the time?
Yes,
Can you
yes.
tell me a bit about your experience working with him?
Barry and I were on the FBI. The best parts of the FBI were villains. I played FBI agents. You wore a fedora, and you carried a gun, and you wore a green suit, and you never smiled, which is boring. But this time, I was playing a communist homosexual. I mean, there's a combination you can't resist. And Barry and I were lodging together. I remember I used to shave, and he'd say, don't do that. He had a very sensitive skin, and I would go, you know. Barry is one of the most entertaining people in the world to be around. Tells you great stories. He calls it life's rich pageant going by. And we did a scene in this thing where we search Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.'s room for something. And I don't know why, but my wife, every time she sees it, it's been on a lot, she collapses with hysteria because we go through the entire room and don't find anything. And I mean, the scene ends on a comma. Talk about suspense and the lack of.
Museum theatre, can you tell me a little bit about that? We're back to the new places.
Sure.
Here.
Well, when Dora announced that we would be becoming a professional company, she had this wonderful place in the Royal Ontario Museum. It wasn't a theatre at all. It was a lecture hall. Had no wings, nothing up above, and I don't know how we did those productions. They did Macbeth on that stage. And I later did a takeoff in the Spring Thaw of the New Play Society Macbeth with the actors sidling up, and they had no room to move, and they kept sort of facing each other's behind. And but the main problem with that backstage was I think they put in a sink, but there were no washrooms. Now, I've always been of a delicate kidney, and I also like to drink. I'm not whiskey, soft drinks. And I remember once in the Playboy of our first production, I was very rarely off stage. There was a moment at the beginning of the second act where I was at about 8 minutes, where I could do something. I thought of bringing a milk can or something, but no, I had forgotten. And so I decided I would make a break for it. There was a way around through the dinosaurs to the washroom at the front. And I sort of tore through there and dashed into the washroom. And it was so fast that I didn't realize it was the wrong one. It was the ladies' washroom. And I heard these rather high fluting voices discussing the play. These were late goers who hadn't come back in for the second act. Maybe they weren't too enthused. And I don't know, how am I going to get my way out of this one? So I squatted with my feet on the seat in case they looked underneath. Did this rather difficult operation. And managed to get out before they did and back, and got on stage just in time. It was a real hazard. And I worked there for 5 years.
How often? How often? What was it?
First year I did about 3 out of the 6 shows. The second year I did less, I think about 2. But the third year I was part of the permanent company. We had 6 actors who were paid $30 a week, not $7.50 a performance. And the great actors, I mean, Toby Robbins, Bob Christie, his wife Margot Christie, myself, Bill Needles, who was one of the stalwarts of the Stratford Shakespeare Festival, has been for the last over 40 years. And we all had other jobs to do. I had to write the biographies in the program. Bill handled the finances. Bob Christie did the advertising. Toby Robbins was just gorgeous. He just, all she had to do was sit there and talk to the batter eyes at the critics, and we got good reviews. And that's the year we did all the Canadian plays. We also did plays like King Lear by William Shakespeare, 10 days rehearsal, starring Dora's son, Mavor, who gave his all at the first rehearsal and went to bed with laryngitis for the next 8 days. We did King Lear without King Lear. I was the bastard. I mean, that's the character I played, Edmund. And it was murder doing it without Lear there. It wasn't bad for me because I was in the subplot. But Mavor finally came back for the dress rehearsal. And he had his voice back. And he was quite wonderful as King Lear. In fact, he was more than wonderful. He was inspired because opening night, we got out, there's a scene where Lear crawls into a cave with the fool. And poor Tom Zacole, my brother Edgar, has been banished from the kingdom. And the 3 shivering wretches are there. And there's supposed to be a footstool. And Lear says, let this stool be my daughter Regan. And he proceeds to tell off the stool in no uncertain terms. And we looked around for the footstool, and the stage manager was sitting on it. And Mavor ad-libbed iambic pentameter for 3 lines. He said, "Where's the stool, fool?" And Jack Metters playing the fool went. That was his ad-lib. He said, "Arise and bring me yonder joint stool, and you and I shall jointly sit upon't." Ad-lib.
His mum was supposedly very flamboyant, right?
I always think of her as a mum. She was a sweet old lady with the soul of Winston Churchill. She was so dedicated. She never kept anything for herself. She was always trying to raise money for the theatre. She was never in it for herself. She objected highly to Spring Thaw when it came along because it wasn't proper theatre. And eventually she became enamored of it because of the crowds that came in, and it became her sole preoccupation. And I think after the 3rd season of Spring Thaw, that's all the New Play Society did.
One of the productions of the New Play Society, which you talked about for us, King Lear's, Mavor, I understand, lost his voice and then only came back opening night, I think?
That was the King Lear. We also did a production of Riel, and Mavor played Louis Riel. And Bob Christie played Sir John A. Macdonald, which he played ever since. But Mavor didn't have laryngitis, but he was working for the UN. Mavor always had 5 different jobs at the same time. He's the most versatile person I've ever met. But he had to go to New York. He had asked me to direct my first play. I didn't really want to. I'm not a director, and I proved it with this production. I tell you, this was there are 26 characters and 14 scenes on this biscuit box of a stage. So the only thing I knew was Spring Thaw, so I staged it like Spring Thaw. The first scene was upstage, the second scene was downstage, and they alternated them. And we had about 10 actors who played 2.5 parts each. Mavor never appeared for about 2/3 of the rehearsal time. And when he did appear, he didn't know his lines. Not only was I directing the play, I was in the damn thing. I was the guy that Louis Riel shot, Thomas Scott, the Orangeman, the Protestant bigot. And I overacted that one too. But when I was shot quite early in the show, I spent the rest of the show lying under the platform, feeding Mavor more his lines. It was a wild production. And at the end of the show, when Louis Riel is hanged, we did everything but put a rope around. We did put a rope around Mavor's neck, then we pulled the lights. And we had the Te Deum sung. And we got the 4 choir boys from St. Mike's College. There was Father Ronan was wonderful at directing choirs. And these 4 kids looked like young hoods, but they sang like angels. And they did the Te Deum. And at the end, on opening night, they sang all the Latin beautifully. And then as the applause started for the end of the show, they went into, "Tell me how long the train's been gone." These guys became the 4 lads. And a year later, I went to New York just before I took off for England. They went to the Rue Bleu to see them with their New York debut. They were great.
So did you ever see the SCTV send up the 4 lads? Lovely.
I love everything SCTV does. No, I missed that one. I'd love to see it.
You visited Les Compagnons de Saint-Laurent up in the Montreal suburbs, right?
No, I saw them in Toronto.
Okay.
They were wonderful. They did Les Précieuses Ridicules of Molière. And I've never seen such stylish acting. I mean, I was just dazzled by them. Jean-Louis Roux and Jean Gascon and the wonderful female actors. I've forgotten their names now.
Was it in French or partly French or some?
It was all in French.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. It was wonderful. I have worked in Montreal with comedians. I worked with Jean-Guy Moreau and Yvon Deschamps and with Doris Lucier, who was Le Père de Lyon, and had a marvelous time.
What was your knowledge of the Quebec scene at the time? I've sort of seen that Canada was trying to establish a national theatre, and Quebec pretty much had one.
When I was in the Air Force, I was stationed in Victoriaville, and Fridolin, the Gracien Gélinas revue came through. I didn't go to see it. I've never seen him do Fridolin. I know him now as a friend, and so, but I never did get to see him.
Could you please pause tape a second?
Yeah.
He was married well to the role. He was married to that role in that play. He was very good.
He's good in every role. He's a great actor, I think.
Yeah.
Rolling.
Okay, rolling?
Yep.
So you missed out in '56. Did you, in Stratford, you decided not to go up after you turned down the role of Scroop?
Yes.
But you said you had some influence on that year.
Well, my relationship with Guthrie was very interesting because we all worshipped the man. He was one of the 2 great mentors of my life. One is Northrop Frye, the literary critic, and Tony Guthrie. And we all called him Tony, and he all called us by our first names or our nicknames. And he knew the names of everybody on the first rehearsal of the first season of the Stratford Festival. He set us out the night before to have dinner with a Stratford family. He said, "There's no such thing as a national theatre. Every theatre has roots in a local community, and we're going to put down our roots here." And so I had dinner with the local doctor and his wife, and he knew how to cement ourselves with the community, unlike Stratford, Connecticut, who ignored the local community, came in from New York and now no longer exists, and Stratford's going strong. But I'm trying to think, what am I answering?
We were talking about, we're setting up for perhaps influencing the picking of Chris Plummer in the role. Yeah. I've got a great shot I can use in this.
Yeah. So when, I was never afraid of Guthrie. He had great rages. He would sometimes make an actor a patsy. But I had kind of a chippy relationship with him, and I think he liked that. I remember once we were using his text, and I said, "I'm sorry, Tony. He was criticizing me for something." And I said, "It's just this damn text. It doesn't work." And of course he laughed uproariously. Then he proceeded to tick off my performances, 15 different mistakes I had made in the part. And I said, "Okay, otherwise okay?" And he loves that, you know. So anyway, he knew I was out of Stratford. He knew I was going to Stratford, Connecticut. And he said, "Well, who am I going to get for Henry V?" He did that. The first year, he tried to kick an actor out of the part, and he wanted me to play it. And I said, "No, it's not fair. Give him a chance." The second year, he did the same thing. Kicked an actor out of a lead role, and I said, "But I'm not right for it. Don't you see that Bill Needle's there? That's exactly what you want." So he said, who do I get for Henry V? And I said, "There's only one actor in Canada can play that, Chris Plummer." And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I've been hearing unfortunate things about Mr. Plummer, and that he's a drunk." And I said, "Not during the show or before the show, maybe after. Not where it counts." So he took a chance, and of course Chris was, I think, the first big star. Of course, Bill Hutt was coming along slowly but surely and has the same stature. But that's the year that they had the French actors, the Quebec actors. And I sorely missed that. I was so busy I never even got to see it. It was, to me, a wonderful idea. I think it was Michael Langham's idea to bring the Quebecois actors in.
Yeah, I think you're right. Please pause, Dave. I have a question. All right. Had you worked with Douglas Campbell at this point? Well,
first time I worked with Douglas Campbell was the very first season of the Stratford Festival. I had seen him. I was in London in 1950-51 and saw him in Shaw, the Captain Brassbound's conversion, and playing an American. And I thought he was an American. He did it so well. So when we met the first day of the rehearsals, I told him about that, and he was very pleased. He told me that on the way to rehearsal, one of the local Stratford guys said, "You with this festival thing?" And Douglas said, "Yes." "How long are you going to be here?" He says, "All summer." He says, "How much you making?" And Douglas said, "None of your bloody business." But the thing about Douglas Campbell, I played a very small part in Richard III. The biggest thing I did was to cue the battle with Bill Hutt, and I crossed swords and did this battle, which we rehearsed every day without fail because it was a marvelous piece of choreography, which Douglas choreographed, and was a big hit of the show. Richard III did not get outstanding reviews from New York, but the battle did. And the hit show was All's Well That Ends Well, because it was an unknown Shakespeare to a lot of people, especially to a lot of critics. And Douglas played Parolles, the braggart, comic figure, and I was the neurasthenic young hero who was a snob and turns down Irene Worth in her Valentina dress because he doesn't know any better. But we would get out on stage together, Douglas and I, just the two of us, do a scene, and he would, I think, forget his lines. And he always went into another play, usually As You Like It. Sometimes Macbeth, which, the Scottish play, which is supposed to be bad luck. And I would be completely nonplussed, and he would finish his speech and look at me, and I would just burn with embarrassment. So I decided I would make up a line of Shakespeare to answer him with. And it wouldn't make any sense, it didn't matter, as long as it had the rhythm. So the next time this happened, and he went into another play, I think it was King Lear at the time, instead of All's Well. He looked at me and I said, "My dearest cuz and used car, the government thereof." And I thought, what's he going to do with that? He walked off stage and left me alone.
To be Campbell. So enough of the festival for a minute.
Yes.
Can you tell me your role in The Inheritance? So I've got quite a cast here. I think you mentioned Toby Robbins already. It's just being beautiful, right? Frank Petty, John Draney, Margot Christie.
A girl called Peggy Brown, who was the star of the NPS and gave it up to marry a rich man, and she now lives in England. And I wonder if she was a big star.
I'm not sure that came out before when you were mentioning the birth of Lear Farquharson.
But that was the first time that the accent of Charlie Farquharson appeared on stage.
As a youngster growing up, you obviously, John Draney would have been much your senior, and you'd have heard him acting all those years. What was it like to work with him, with all these people that you admired?
I was on the second team of the stage series, or radio broadcast every Sunday night. And along with John was the best of them all, but there were some Bud Knapp, Bernie Braden, Fletcher Markle, Tommy Tweed, who was a comic genius, and I was sort of the kid on the outside with some other lesser players. And these guys were inspiring. Not only were they inspiring, but the whole concept of using Canadian dramatists on a radio series. There are very few shows that people feel impelled to watch. The Air Farce is one right now. This hour has 22 minutes at the moment. In those days, people listened to the stage series. They felt they would miss something if they had. And Andrew Allen brought in all kinds of new Canadian writing talents. Len Peterson was probably the major one. But that was our national theatre, not Stratford, because it was Canadian actors in Canadian plays. And I've always felt so fortunate to be a lesser dim bulb in that galaxy. John was probably the best radio actor in the world, that's all. It's interesting because when he did television, it didn't have the same impact. Because television, John had a limp and it restricted his playing. But on a microphone, he could be anything, absolutely anything. And a dear man. We used to have such fun doing jokes together, and he had a frog called Greenie, and who had a film contract. And I said, "Who's your contract with?" He'd say, "Rank."
Time of Your Life, you worked with him too.
Time of Your Life was, I can't remember who directed it, because Fletcher Markle played the lead in one of his few appearances on stage. I played Harry the dancer, and I'm not a dancer. So I made up I watched Soul Train. I mean, this is long before Soul Train, but boogie dancing. It wasn't tap. I could, because I didn't do tap. But there was an all-star cast as far as Toronto was concerned.
They couldn't have cast John Draney as a dancer, I guess. Lauren Green was in that too. Could you talk a little bit about him?
Yes, Lauren Green played the cop. Lauren was a wonderful guy. He really wanted to not be the voice of Canada and the successful announcer, and he would do anything. We did a play of Jean-Paul Sartre's called Les Mains Sales, Red Gloves. It's also called something else in English when they did it on Broadway, with Honor Blackman. You remember Pussy Galore? It was a wonderful cast. We were terrific, I say, but we felt terrific anyway. And we later did it on television as one of the first shows on closed circuit. It was never shown to any audience, but they were experimenting with cameras. Lauren became, a legend because of Bonanza. But he always really wanted to be a serious actor. When he left CKEY News to become Brutus in Shakespeare, they replaced Lauren with a guy called Richard Scott, who sounded exactly like Lauren Green. word for word, syllable for syllable. And Wayne Schuster said they always wanted to go down to Stratford and stop a rehearsal of Julius Caesar and say to Guthrie, no, not him. We wanted Richard Scott. But you know, Lorne visited me when I was in England in '63. And he was, I mean, Bonanza was the most popular television show in the world at that time. And Lorne was such a generous guy. He took me to Windsor for the day off, and he was walking around the castle and past the Grenadier Guards guarding the castle. And I was following about 40 feet back because there was a crowd of people around Lorne. And those guards, you know, are not supposed to say anything. When they're on duty, they're not supposed to smile or anything. And as Lorne passed, I heard one of the guards say, "That's a fellow on Bonanza!"
Jane Mallet, can we dip into the subject a little bit here?
Jane Mallet taught me more about comedy than anybody ever has. She was just a natural genius in comedy. And she was the one who said, she hired me once to be her opening act at a convention in Montreal. And I did a lot of political humor, making fun of the government, because I love to. And everybody thought who is this 20-year-old smartass? And I didn't go over well at all. And she said, you've got to get yourself a mask. You've got to disguise yourself. She says, people don't want some young snip telling them what to do with their government. But if you pretended to be older, and that's how the Charlie Farquharson idea hit me. I used to grow, and I still do, grow a stubble on my face. Now it's nice and white, and I've actually reached the age of when people are supposed to be wise. But that's what made me a comedian, was the fact that I didn't do myself. Most comedians did, you know. Wayne and Schuster were actors. Dave Broadfoot was always a character. He was the member from Kicking Horse Pass. The kids on Second City are not themselves. You see them at the beginning of the show, and they're terribly shy about being themselves, like Joe Flaherty comes on. Or the Air Force, you see them at the pictures at the beginning of the show, and they're very self-conscious about being themselves. But let them be somebody else, like Lucien Bouchard or anything, and they're fabulous.